966.
This is the 966 episode 76. Hello, Richard.
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
I'm doing better.
Feeling good. Yeah, you had a round with a good round.
I've had quite the 10 days. Yes. How are you doing?
I'm good. We have to. How are we going to do it? Are we going to have seasons?
You mean like Riyadh season and Jeddah season, or
Yeah,
what do you mean?
I wish. Wouldn't that be nice? I'd like to have the budget to do those. But no, I'm talking about the 966 season. Will we have season 1 episode, or will we have just unfolding episodes?
No, this is like one season. We never age. It's all just one existence in one continuum.
It does keep us young. This is our first season.
Yes, this is our first season, our inaugural season. And stay tuned for season 2. It's coming just after the next episode. It'll be here. Richard, we are back in action with episode 76 coming up shortly. We've got a really, really great conversation with Antonia Carver, excuse me. We couldn't figure out how to pronounce it until we started talking with them, but
I had to ask her.
Yeah.
Same thing.
So, and I'm Richard, as you know, intimately. I'm not part of this conversation due to a very serious illness that I suffered upon arriving back from Saudi Arabia on Monday, which was just horrible. And I'm feeling better now, but man, not a great way to be welcomed back. And this is Richard, as you know, just a little aside, this is the second interview I've missed due to sickness upon returning from Saudi Arabia. So hopefully the last.
Well, as I mentioned to Antonia, and I had to clarify with her name too, and I still probably botched it. She's lovely. She's wonderful. She's amazingly informed. It's great. It's very strange doing it without you. I miss you when you're not there. But the reality is you live in basically a human bioweapons lab with 2 youngsters. So I mean, you're fending off germs and all sorts of things nonstop, 24/7. So
and I
kudos
know
to
you know
for
what
just
that's
missing
like.
too.
Yeah. And it hurts to laugh right now because of the vomiting that occurred in the last 36 hours or so. But it does feel really good to be sitting upright, extra pale, ready to sail, more than a few pounds lighter after a nice counterbalance to all the weight that I just gained in Riyadh last week. So anyway, the conversation is really, really great. I had the privilege of listening to it. As Richard, as you know, when I get to listen to it as an end user, it's really cool. And it got a little sneak peek too, which was exciting, but well done. And for our listeners and viewers, it's coming up here in a few minutes. Really, really good. Before we get started, we don't need to, we say this every episode, but we have to. Please subscribe wherever you're getting this. Really cool, Richard, to see all the people subscribing and tuning into us every week. And very cool to be hearing from those people in person, either in Riyadh or Washington or wherever else. It's really cool when people are like, hey, you're the guy from the 966. And I'm like, yes, the listeners do exist, but it's cool to see those numbers grow. So
absolutely. And it's fun at this point because, when we started out, we were just doing sort of, subscribers. I was subscriber building the book. And now we have so many subscribers, they just round it, big numbers.
Yes.
It's not even specific. It's just, 1,000 plus or this or that.
Yes, we were excited about the subscriber that we had for the first few episodes, and now we can use the plural.
It was a big deal. And that wasn't long ago. That was what? That was a little over a year ago.
Yeah. So we really made a lot of progress with this. And again, it started as just sort of us talking about, everything going on, the work we were already doing. And we said, let's just hit record and see what happens. And yeah, it's really exciting to see this. And we've got another cool, awesome year ahead of us of growth. Great guests coming up too in the coming weeks, Richard, as well. And I know you will be traveling to Saudi Arabia in just a few weeks. So we'll have to schedule that in and stuff. Maybe we can do an episode where you're there and, have a little base of operations, but we're working on that. Scheduling is always one of our biggest challenges as a lean operation here. So
maybe we'll do a man in the street episode.
Richard, let's get going. What's your one big thing this week?
It's a repeat, and it's a repeat for a reason. We just say is February 22nd, 2023, the second, the date of the Saudi Arabia's National Founding Day, which was just declared as a National Founding Day last year. So this is the second one. And we've talked about the National Founding Day and why it was so notable and so meaningful. It's interesting now we're doing the second because there'll become a time, Lucian, where this won't be novel anymore, and I guess that's the point. It becomes part of the national narrative, and that's what I find so fascinating about everything that's going on in Saudi Arabia. There's many things we find interesting. We talk about them all the time in the 966, but when you amongst all the giga projects and this and that and the reforms and that, you sort of miss the bigger thing that's going on, and that's the sort of transcending change of perception for Saudis. Vision 2030 is no longer and has not been, and we've had guests on the show like Dr. Mark Thompson and others talk about the psychological impact, the mental impact, the mindset change, and how people identify themselves, how Saudis identify themselves, and it's very much through the perspective of Vision 2030, and it's a fascinating thing to watch as a country become sort of a nation, become sort of the curator of its own narrative, which is what's happening in Saudi Arabia. And I want to go back to something we talked about last year at this time about what a nation is. And, just to give it a definition, it is a cultural political community that has become conscious of its own coherence, unity, and particular interests. It shares a common myth of origins and descent. Talked about this before, cannot emphasize it enough. A common history, elements of distinctive culture, a common territorial association, a sense of group solidarity. One of the fascinating things about Founding Day is not so much that what's being put forth is a different story about the origins of Saudi Arabia. It's now talking about the origins of the first Saudi state going back to 1727, when Mohammed bin Saud, came into leadership of the Emirate of Diriyah, which is the capital and the ruling center of the day, and created the first Saudi state. This is all fascinating, and you can go through it. But the really interesting thing to me is not that this story is being told, but by who's telling it. And it's very much over these past 5 years, Saudi Arabia sort of claiming their own narrative. And I know this from years and years, and you've seen it too, but from years and years of dealing with Saudi, especially when they come out to the West or they go, they leave their country of which they have tremendous pride. We know Saudis, good friends of ours. They're very proud of their country. But a lot of times when they're abroad, they're sort of put on their back foot because, the only thing people know about Saudi Arabia is often negative things, oil, terrorism, radical thought, intolerance, these things that have been used to define Saudi Arabia as something. And the thing that's fascinating about what's going on is Saudi Arabia is going, nope, we are defining ourselves. This is our narrative. It's evolving, it's changing. We're proud of it. And we're going to put it out there. And so so like I said, there you could look at this, look at Vision 2030 as a huge construction project or revamping the regulatory environment. The big thing is changing the mindset. And we've heard so many of our guests talk about this. So when we come to a node like this, a nexus, sort of a linchpin, national Founding Day, which is different, of course, from National Day, which is in September. The Founding Day is a narrative that the Saudis have embraced, and this is our story, and we're telling it. And that's when you sort of become, as I said, by this definition, you become a nation.
Yeah, I mean, Richard, this is the big thing this week, really, in Saudi Arabia, because there's a lot to be proud of now, and everybody sort of realizes what's going on in Saudi Arabia, all the changes, all the developments, the progression and the trajectory of what's happening in Saudi Arabia. But this is really cool because this is about the origin and the foundation and the base of everything that's happening now goes back to its founding. And in America, in the United States, July 4th is pretty much the equivalent of this. And what we're celebrating with July 4th is not just patriotism about what we are doing today as a country and who we are as a nation and how we got here, but how we started. And it's how you start, and the story, every story has a beginning. And for Saudi Arabia, this is celebrating the beginning. And you can see it, Richard, really everywhere. I mean, it's not just, hey, we've got some new developments, some giga projects, and Riyadh is much more livable, and there's, Michelin star restaurants here. It's, we are all one people, and we have one identity here. And Saudis should be proud of their country, both where they came from and as an emerging power today. This is a really good one, Richard, too, because what it does when you have holidays like this, and this is the second year, last year they launched this holiday, and I feel like in September they celebrate National Day, as you noted, and that's sort of celebrating the national identity of Saudi Arabia today. And then this is about the origins. And what you see in the developments happening in Saudi Arabia today is a very serious focus on where they came from. And that is coming out in architectural design. It's coming out in master planning. I mean, there's an identity that is worth celebrating and worth taking a moment, or in this case, one day if you're the private sector and 2 days if you're the public sector, into the weekend, and pressing pause on everything, looking around and saying, we're proud of not just where we are or what we're doing today, but where we came from. I think it's really interesting. You mentioned, Richard, Saudis abroad. It's tough for them. I mean, there was tough for them before this to sort of have that identity. They usually visited nations like the UK and the United States as Saudis, and they wanted to fit in, and they do want to fit in wherever they go, just as we want to fit in when we go there. But there's an emerging sort of identity, and it's cool that this like crystallizes it among all Saudis, and all Saudis can be proud of this. And yeah, we're going to talk about this a little bit, but you can see it too in places like Diriyah Gate, the new development area there, which is just stunning. And you can see it in the celebration of Al Ula and these other places, archaeological places in Saudi Arabia, across Saudi Arabia, where they're saying, we know who we are today, but we really want to celebrate where we came from, just as we do here and other countries do as well. So this is a big thing. This is the big thing this week. And Saudis are celebrating, and on behalf of both of us, I believe I can wish everybody a happy founding day, because it's cool. It's cool to see, man.
Well, I want to riff off two of your points if I can. I don't want to go too long. But the National Day, it has been in place for 90 plus years. And it's really a geopolitical designation. It recognizes that Saudi Arabia unified the peninsula into a state that's recognized by the UN and the world in 1932. It's an external designation. Obviously, they celebrate it because every country is glad to be recognized as a self-governed territory. The founding day, as we've talked about, goes back much, much farther, and it talks about how we want to be defined. Saudis want to be defined. But also, I want to talk a little bit about Saudis abroad. And I think it's really important, and we both understand this, but any listeners to understand that Saudis aren't defensive about their country. They love their country, and they're very proud of where they come from. The problem so much is common understanding. And I think of my kids. So I have 3 kids. They, and they all subjected, like every kid growing up, when you go back to a family event, uncle, aunts, nephews, nieces, whatever, grandparents, whatever, they all go, what are you doing? And they get asked the same question repeatedly. And of course, they're good kids, so they want to be responsive and engage and stuff. But, it's tough when you don't have a good story. It's tough if you dropped out of school, or you got into a fight, or, you're not feeling good about your job, or you have difficulty in a marriage. You know what I mean? Your story isn't very good. And when you have to repeat it all the time to an audience that is only partially interested. And this is what I'm saying so much about when a Saudi goes abroad now, and we saw it. We did a report last year about a Karma research study. Karma is like a PR and data and media monitoring group that talked about how from 2021 through the first quarter of 2022, global media 2030, Vision 2030, for the first time, was the most frequently cited topic for global media. So what I'm saying now is if a Saudi is abroad, there is a theme. There is something that people can attach to. Oh yeah, we're reforming, we're moving ahead, we're doing these amazing things. The economy is booming, it's diversifying. Vision 2030. These are the story's fun to tell right now. You don't have to be defensive about any of this. And I guess that's a little bit of real world, environment, real world, just a reality for everybody. And that's why I say it's just a fascinating process to see them create their own story, agree on their own story, like the narrative, and share the narrative.
And this story is a story of an improbable nation, which is very similar to the United States. I mean, we are a very large country, the United States, with many different and a very diverse, they call it the melting pot. I mean, different races, different national, originating national countries from, immigrants and really, I mean, people in Seattle and New York and Florida and Chicago. People are very different in the United States, but we share the identity of being American. And very similar to that in Saudi Arabia, I mean, you had the unification of many different tribes who all now see each other as other Saudis instead of members of a different tribe. And that's so cool. And that's very improbable. If you were to look back in time and say, hey, this is going to happen. All these people are now going to be one nationality, one group of people. And, good on them, man. I mean, this is great and worth celebrating. So
there will be some commentator that said, you white guys, I just want to add to your comment. It would be similar if the Native Americans ran America. You know what I mean? Because obviously one of the things about Saudi Arabia is that it was never conquered. I mean, Riyadh was raised at one point, but it was never colonized.
Yes,
it's his own. Bedouins, nomads. They're the people who are obviously Jeddah and the coast are cosmopolitan, but the country is their own, and they've been there, and so there are similarities for sure.
Some similarities, yes.
But I just want to make sure
yeah.
We're not missing some, because somebody will rightfully say, hey, wait a second now.
Richard, a good one. And we both wish everyone a happy founding day in Saudi Arabia. It's really cool to see. Very cool to see also the Ministry of Culture is putting out on Twitter and other social networks all the stuff going on in Saudi Arabia. You've got, festivals and celebrations large and small. So if you're there, if you're local in Saudi Arabia, if you are a Saudi, if you're a visitor in Saudi Arabia, there's a lot to do and see over the next few days. This will run until Sunday. It's a 4-day holiday if you're in the public sector. And then, so it's very, very cool time to be there and very exciting. So,
and all those people who subscribe to the Sustuk Review know all this already.
Indeed, we're just repeating ourselves to those people. And but you're exactly right, Richard, because all week we've been sort of talking about this. This is a huge deal, and so we wanted to sort of highlight that, and that's why it's such a good one big thing. I think, Richard, the second one big thing, tier 2 one big thing, which is amazing considering what it is that Saudi Arabia has revealed plans to build a new downtown area for Riyadh with the launch of the new Murabba development company, which will include a new cube-like building called the New Muka'ab. Muka'ab means cube in Arabic. The plans were revealed by the Public Investment Fund last week. The new Murabba project will be built around the concept of sustainability, featuring green areas and walking and cycling paths that will enhance the quality of life by promoting activity, healthy lifestyles, community activities, etc. And then, Richard, I'm sort of going to start just as I have been doing here with this sort of who, what, where, when, why, because it's kind of amazing. If you haven't heard of this yet, check it out online. But the development is going to be sort of very large. I mean, 2 square kilometers is just the main building, which is the Muka'ab, which is the cube. And it's designed to be sort of, I'll quote here, an exceptional, iconic landmark featuring the latest innovative technologies. The design of the Muka'ab includes first of its kind facilities and will be one of the largest built structures in the world, standing at 400 meters high, 400 meters wide, and 400 meters long. That is incredible. That is so big. The cubic shape of the Muka'ab will ensure the ultimate utilization of space and accommodate the technologies necessary to develop the icon. And then, Richard, if you see it, and we'll have some images rolling for this for our YouTube followers and watchers, but inspired by the modern Najdi architectural style. So it does have the sort of goldish Arabic design to it on the outside, but it will be very modern on the inside, and you can sort of see it. There's an interesting little spiral on the inside. I'm not going to do a great job describing it. You have to just go onto our YouTube and watch some of the roll here because it's unbelievable. And Richard, I had the unique experience of hearing about this announcement and then being able to tell a handful of Saudi friends who hadn't heard it yet over dinner and describing to it. They went in raw. They were like, "Hey, yeah, what's going on?" I'm like, "Have you heard about this new gigantic cube they're going to build in downtown Riyadh?" And they're like, "What?" No. And I'm like, "Well, let me tell you." So with the facts out there, and just I want to jump to a few observations here, and then Richard, I want you to plug in pretty quickly here. But number one, this is a huge announcement and a big price tag and an ambitious vision. This all sounds very familiar. In reality, one observation here, this, when I heard of this, Richard, I'm sure you were the same way. It didn't strike me as one of those big giga mega announcements like Neom or Trojena, where you had to just take a second and say, okay, if they build this, then wow. And you sort of had to process like, well, maybe this is a vision and what they end up with is shorter or sort of not this. But I think when I heard about this is just a personal view. I didn't think of it as, wow, this would be ambitious if they built it. I'd sort of thought of it as, whoa, I mean, they're going to do this. It sort of hit differently. These announcements now, these giga announcements have credibility. I think that matters a lot. They're not met with the eye rolls or the skepticism, but rather with wonder and excitement and sort of having your mind blown. So I mean, that's an earned reputation from Saudi Arabia because they're following up on all their announcements. They're doing what they're saying and they're saying what they're doing. And that's pretty clear. We're 6 years now in Vision 2030. I think that pretty much everything that they've announced, from big things to small things, they've followed up on, which is amazing. Second sort of observation, this is a good idea. Riyadh is a really quickly changing city. We've talked about that on the show. One issue with Riyadh, it's the same issue that other cities have, like Los Angeles and New York. It's sprawling, and if you want to develop, it develops out. What's cool about the new Muka'ab and this new Murabba development is that it centralizes things in Riyadh. And you have other centers of Riyadh, but it's not something that's a massive sprawling development. It's a huge development in a relatively smaller footprint for what it offers. And it prioritizes things like walkability, things like walking to work. Riyadh's not a really walkable city pretty much at all. So when you're there, you're taking a car everywhere you go. And you sort of see that Riyadh has KAFD, CAFT, that's centralized. That's cool. If you're living there and you're working there, you're walking to work. There's just something about that that's really cool. And what's cool about this is same thing. It's built to be centralized, to get people to go to the middle. So you have a Riyadh with this design that's concentrating again, and that's excellent. And then third, I just want to note the word iconic is used by the PIF when they announced this. This is an iconic design, and this is an iconic building. And we still must say, if it gets built and if it gets done, but I think, there's a seriousness about what Saudi Arabia is doing. This building, the Muka'ab, is amazing. I mean, there's an amazing factor to this. This would be worth seeing with your own eyes. I mean, you would be able to see it flying into Riyadh from the airplane. It would be so big. So there's a tourism angle here. It's not just about quality of life for those living there, but I mean, if and when this thing gets built, it seems like the type of thing that could be on many people's bucket lists, saying, I've got to see the giant Muka'ab in the middle of Riyadh, which is just stunning and is the height of the Empire State Building, and I think can fit what is it, Richard? 40 or 400 Empire State Buildings in it. Sorry, I don't have that number, but that's a large number of Empire State Buildings inside of it. So, I mean, this is rad. This is super cool. So, anyway, yeah, very exciting, an amazing project. Richard, you may be muted, by the way.
Sorry.
No problem. I was like, wait, muted. I put him to sleep over there.
No wonder the show was going so well. That's pretty cool. You get to be the source of information for locals.
I felt like I came up with the idea myself.
So I look at this. Let me take another angle. When I lived in Riyadh, I lived in the Olaya district, which, if you look at it, is like the heart of Riyadh. This is when Riyadh was, maybe 1 million people, maybe. maybe 40 kilometers from where I lived in Olea to the airport. Um, of course, the city didn't sprawl like it did. This was in the 80s when I first lived in Riyadh. Um, and so obviously the city has sprawled enormously. And what we're looking at here for Murabba is out north near the airport, actually. I mean, so this city center, quote unquote, would be close to 30 kilometers from where I actually lived in the city center of Riyadh, you know, 3 decades ago. Um, so I find it interesting because A, there's nothing there, but I also I find it interesting the Murabba part of it, because Murabba is really, there was an old Murabba. Murabba is sort of a term for square, or like as in market square, or so there was, Murabba was actually a square building that was a center of activity and still exists today, an old Murabba. And you know, Riyadh desperately needs housing, desperately needs to upgrade its livability. You know, so much of what it's doing is pointing towards Expo 2030. It really wants to enhance its bid there. It wants to be a top 10 international city. It wants to reach 10 million people in population. It needs to be planning these things. And so while I think the Mukaab is stunning and interesting, the rest of it is what I find, what might end up being really have impact on livability in Riyadh. And again, the whole city is going north because that's where the room is. And so it's a fascinating project. I think it's, I like these. I love the Doria Gate project because it's, you know, it's organic. It's building on something that exists. There's already a logic, both psychological and economic to it. You know, a new Murabba, you know, in terms of the needs of the city, has a logic. Neom, I think, is fascinating. It's an extraordinary, as I've said before many times, and this is a big swing, and I admire it for that. I hope it succeeds, but it's a different proposition. We don't know if anybody's going to go to the you know, the northwest of Saudi Arabia to live there. So it's hard to know. But you know, the logic of a central Jeddah project, or a logic of a Diriyah Gate, or a new Murabba, uh, is compelling, or some of the things they're doing down south in the Asir and that sort of thing. You know, you can see, because there are people here, there's jobs here, there's families here, there's connections here. So if you can give them a better livability that this might represent, it you know, it has a logic to it of its own. So whenever I see giga projects, you know, I think at this point, and I don't think we're not saying anything, we're not putting it down. We sort of filter through the PR and say, okay, what's happening here? And what we've seen with the giga projects, regardless of the glitz, you know, it often has, and usually has, economic, you know, logic behind it. And even as they're going through, even if it's a lost leader, it's attracting investment, it's attracting skill sets from abroad, it's creating jobs, it's doing all the things that Vision 2030 wants to do. This is yet another project in it. And so I guess what I'm saying is, when everyone had something to say about the Macabre, you know, and some people criticize it, some people are really excited about it. I think in the context of a city trying to build out and accommodate and improve livability, it's a really interesting project, even without the Macabre.
100%. I mean, you can't do this project where you used to live or in the old area
No,
of Riyadh, just because you'd have to like completely, you know, level it and start fresh.
but that's what's really interesting. Sorry to interrupt. Go
No,
ahead.
no, go ahead.
That's what's really interesting. You have sort of the, you know, when you look at these giga projects, and as I've mentioned, as we've mentioned before, you know, our good friends at Knight Frank are tracking 15 giga projects in the U.S. I mean, in Saudi Arabia. You know, some of them are greenfield.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them are, you know, remakes of existing infrastructure. And this is one of those. It's almost a tweener. It's kind of a greenfield, but it's still organic to an existing city. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's a city too. You mentioned this, but real estate is just trying to wrap my head around it, because it's just, I mean, it's gone up, up, up just in the last few years. but yet it's still basically impossible to find a really good apartment that isn't like $100,000 a year to live there. I mean, it's incredible. I mean, so they're solving a real problem with this. So
office space is supposed to be something like 98%
yeah,
filled.
it's insane. It's exciting for Saudi Arabia and for Riyadh. The other thing too that I thought about, Richard, and you mentioned NEOM. Let me actually make 2 points here really quickly, and I don't want to go on too long here. I apologize to our listeners and viewers who are excited about Antonio, but
something else.
But 2 things. Number one, if you're in Riyadh, and Richard, you're going just in a few weeks here, you've got to go to the line exhibit. It is unbelievable. And I sort of was like, okay, I landed there on Saturday night. And Sunday morning was one of the first things I did just to sort of get my feet wet and get my bearings. And it was, obviously I knew jet lag was going to be horrible. I sort of had high expectations because I've seen every single piece of art and video and, rendering of the line. We had Jacob Mum, CEO of Bechtel Saudi Arabia, on the program a few weeks ago talking about how much dirt they're moving around in NEOM to build the spine. I knew it was real, but after seeing this exhibit, I just... mind-blowing is the best way to describe it. The exhibit itself is mind-blowing. It's a huge, sprawling exhibit that goes into detail I didn't even know about. Just unbelievable. And it's free. Just got to register online. It's so cool. But also, Richard, having this come into Riyadh by 2030, as you mentioned, which is a significant date, if it makes Riyadh, if they do build NEOM exactly as they describe it, it makes it competitive with NEOM. I mean, NEOM is going to be a really, really cool place to live. 7 million people could live there in the line and around the area, and got the marina and all this other stuff going on. I mean, that city is going to be cool. This could make Riyadh competitive with that. You wonder sort of if the line comes in like that, why you would choose Riyadh over the line. But I mean, if this area comes in and this is the place to be in Riyadh, just like CAFT seems like it could be anywhere in the world. It's cool to see all this going on, really. And to see the Public Investment Fund and Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman follow through on what they're saying, at least, so far. So,
and as we talk about this, one of the interesting, the distinction between the line and Riyadh, let's say Riyadh 2030, envisioned as they would like to see it, somewhere between 8 and 10 million people, and a livable city. That's a boatload to happen in 7 years, by the way, for any of these. So we have to be realistic. Mohammed bin Salman has specifically stated he sort of sees the line as 50-50 between expats and Saudis. So, Riyadh will never be 50-50 expat Saudis. And that's sort of the thing. You may want to live in the line and think that's really cool and love it or and that sort of thing. But, if you're living in Riyadh, you can visit your grandparents and your parents and your cousins and all your friends that you've grown up with. Or same with Jeddah or Dammam, Khobar, or whatever. Do you know what I mean? There's an organic history there. There's legacy. There's ties. Whereas NEOM would be an entirely different proposition. That's a whole new thing in the desert. And it may be attractive to some and attractive to others. And actually, one of the interesting things about Faisal Durrani, who was one of our favorites, the Middle East manager and partner for Knight Frank, the studies they've shown is there's a whole lot of interest in NEOM as a residential, but as I understand it, a lot of it is about second homes. So you might have people with, maybe, so anyway, this is a discussion. Think about this discussion. First of all, NEOM doesn't exist yet, but let's say we're looking at 2035 and you have these options, to live in NEOM, there's a job in NEOM. Maybe you want to raise your family there. Maybe you're a young couple and you're good, really want to be in, the same city as your parents. Whatever, but you're going to have options that you didn't have before.
100%. Richard, that was great. Let's
it's fun. It's good to have you back. It's good to have you off your sick bed and with us.
My sick bed is right next to me, and I have PTSD just looking over at it right now. It was that was something else. So here's a conversation that I missed, but get to enjoy right now with Antonia Carver from Art Jameel and Hey Jameel and Jeddah. Just really cool. And Richard, if I may just sort of add really quickly to the conversation beforehand, this is sort of part of what we're doing with the 966. We have all kinds of different guests of all backgrounds with all professional focuses, and arts and culture, fits into that story as well. And this is just such a great conversation. So enjoy. And sorry to miss it, Richard.
No, it was great. And if I can add, sorry to add,
Yes.
but to your point exactly, Antonia Carver was a treat. She's awesome, but it was so much fun. In the course of the discussion, sort of organically came up that we had an episode with Todd Albert Nims. We had an episode with Sean Foley, all people who were deeply involved in the Saudi art scene. And that's one of the gifts of the 966 that I think you and I both genuinely appreciate, is the opportunity to interact with these really interesting people across sectors, and in this case in the arts community. And I think it's just we'll do more and more, but it's just I felt very fortunate to be able to have been able to talk with these folks, and also now to include Antonia in the list.
Enjoy.
Welcome. We're just absolutely delighted to be joined today by Antonia Carver. She is director of Art Jameel, which is an extraordinary initiative that actually has a Dubai presence as well as a Jeddah presence. We sort of started talking about this some time back, and so we're really pleased that we're able to have you here today.
Thanks so much, Richard. Delighted.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time. There's so much going on in the art scene in Saudi Arabia now, and I think you can trace certainly much of this back to the Art Jameel initiative. And I want to get to all that. I want to get to the Abdulatif Jameel, what they've done for the community, as well as Art Jameel. But let's talk about your beginnings and how you got interested in this field and your origins, as it were.
Thank you. Well, thanks so much for having me on. I mean, I'm a big fan, and obviously you've interviewed so many incredible people working in Saudi and working in the Gulf over the years. So really happy to be part of this kind of alumni of the 966. So yeah, I studied at the University of Edinburgh in the early 90s, and I just opted for social science. I'd always been interested in the arts, but I kind of thought anthropology and sociology would suit me fine, but then managed to kind of shoehorn art into my anthropology degree, and did my thesis on Aboriginal artists in Australia that were working in cities and kind of navigate, really interesting, sort of looking at Indigenous politics and how the presence of art and culture, and how that kind of field enabled a different kind of conversation about art and identity, Blackness, and kind of contemporary ethnicities and politics in Australia. So I guess for me, the route into art was always from the angle of, what does it mean to the community? What does it mean to the artist? Not only here's a pretty picture on the wall, but more kind of about the questions and the debates that come out of art making. And for me, that's never stopped, really. So yeah, it's been since I graduated in 1994, and have ever since kind of worked in some field in the arts, from publishing to exhibitions to film festivals to community events, and always just kind of thinking, how can art broker a conversation, basically.
Well, you answered the question right out of the gate, because your master's is in social anthropology. So the interest in Australia and Aboriginal, aspects of that. So how did you end up out in Dubai and the Middle East?
Yeah, good question. Well, I came back to London. I lived in Australia for a while, and then came back to London in the kind of mid to late 90s, and started working then at the Institute of International Visual Arts, INIVA, it's acronym, in London. And that organization was looking particularly at how London as a city was becoming a multi-ethnic city, and this hadn't been really recognized in the arts. So INIVA was a kind of very flexible think tank type of model that went into different organizations and worked with them to think through the kind of future of the arts, and looking at the arts as a multi-ethnic space.
So just for context, just for context, I hate to interrupt. This is the early aughts, right? This is 2000.
Yeah, this is earlier. This is kind of 1997, 98, around that kind of time. And, London was coming out of what was known as the Black British art movement, and into the kind of new understanding of itself as a multi-ethnic city. So I started through that, getting to know some artists that were from Iran and the Arab world, that were based in the UK. and then started also looking at film practice. So I started working with the Edinburgh Film Festival and curating films for them from what became the kind of Middle East kind of focus. So then, my by the kind of late 90s, I was working in publishing as well, and by the sort of early 2000s, began to get sort of slightly itchy feet, and London. London's a kind of city that you can work in for a while, and sometimes you just need a bit of a breather from that kind of environment. And my husband is a journalist; he specializes in the Arab world as well. So we kind of thought, let's go and check out this city that everybody's talking about, Dubai, which is becoming a center not only for the media but also for the arts. And we imagined a couple of years and then we'll move on to somewhere. At that time we thought Beirut or somewhere like that, where I think that's where the action is. And then very quickly when we got to Dubai, we realized that this was a city that was really booming and attracting people from all over the world. It was a real kind of becoming a real center for the Arab world and South Asia. So people were kind of gathering there, and just a hugely exciting place to be.
Well, this is fascinating, and I want our listeners and our viewers to understand, your time and place. We had, I don't know if you know Todd Albert Nims, who we had on an earlier episode, and it was fun to go with him through the comedy scene and the art cinema scene and that sort of thing, and now the theater scene. Where he was sort of there when it was all coming together. So you're here in Dubai. This is 2003 when you first arrived.
Yeah, 2001.
2001.
So just after 9/11, we moved to Dubai at that point. And those early 2000s were really a kind of roller coaster in Dubai. It was a kind of, the UAE generally, but particularly sort of around Dubai. And if you can imagine a kind of a time when, higher education, the opportunities in higher education were growing very rapidly. You had the first kind of graduates coming through from the universities that had been set up in the late 90s in the UAE. You also had this kind of time when, just to be very frank, it was very difficult for a lot of young people from the Arab world and people from different Muslim communities at that time to travel to the States to study.
Right.
It was very difficult for people to get visas. So there was this kind of homecoming in a way in 2000 the early sort of 2000s, and a lot of people who would have gone and studied abroad decided instead to study in universities in the Gulf, and particularly in Dubai at that time. And you also had a kind of generation that had gone away to study in the late 90s because there weren't arts programs available at that time, so they'd gone and studied in America, in Europe, and they'd come back to the Gulf as well with this kind of idea of, let's make our own, New York in the Gulf. Let's make a place that's full of culture, that has this kind of vibrancy. So a lot of movement started in those kind of early years, and I was part of this collective called Bidoon, and riffing off the word meaning without,
right,
in Arabic and also in Farsi, and kind of thinking about what it is to be without a very specific home. So it was really kind of tapping into that generation that saw themselves as having one foot somewhere else, that were determined to make Dubai their own city and to really become kind of cultural stakeholders in their own city. So we set up, club nights and photography exhibitions and meeting points and collectives. And out of that came Bidoon magazine, which launched in 2003. And at the same time, I was working for the art newspaper, reporting on what was happening in the arts, and also for Screen International, which is a film magazine. And in 2003, Dubai Film Festival also started, and I was part of the founding programming team for that, and particularly working on Arab film and Iranian film for Dubai Film Festival, selecting the films. So it was a time of sort of big shifts and a lot of kind of ground up energy, particularly in Dubai. And then over the years, towards the kind of mid 2000s, came the plans in Abu Dhabi for Saadiyat Island, the Louvre Abu Dhabi, the Guggenheim. There was that kind of vision sort of started up at that point. And then in Qatar, things began moving as well. You had sort of stirrings of people understanding, that there was this hugely vibrant arts movement in Saudi as well through the work of Edge of Arabia, which was, the international community understanding, what was going on in Saudi, which was something that Art Jameel was involved in. I wasn't at that time part of Art Jameel, but we were observing and celebrating this great kind of movement. So the reason I brought up the kind of universities and young people moving into the city is just sometimes this sort of perfect storm develops where you have the rise of higher education, and cities that have really vibrant university campuses always, have a special kind of boost when it comes to the arts. You had this kind of groundswell of people thinking about how can we express ourselves in our own terms from the Gulf, not what's imposed from outside, but how do we tell the world who we are and how we live and what we want to be. And then alongside that, you have the establishment of Dubai Media City, so people working in advertising, magazines, newspapers, in design, all sort of setting up shop, CNN moving in, everybody kind of setting up shop in Dubai. And then alongside that, the Dubai Financial Center, so people who work in banking and, convened in Dubai from across the Arab world and South Asia. And a lot of these families were people who'd always been interested in the arts in their own hometown. So they kind of naturally became these kind of supporters and people that were interested in sort of really investing in the arts and getting involved. So it was, there's a lot more to say. I don't know whether to go into the story anymore.
That's fascinating. And it's really curious listening to you speak, because clearly the Dubai phenomenon, that began in the early 2000s and everybody watched from afar, but you're on the ground there. And it seems like a whole ferment of not only expats, but significantly and most importantly, Emiratis. But there also seems to be an overlay of policy that, came in and said, okay, this is important to our growth. This is important to our identity. We're going to support it. Is that accurate?
I think so. Absolutely. Absolutely. I think it was also a time when, the Gulf itself was beginning to, all the different countries of the Gulf and the different scenes, very different from each other, obviously. If you compare Kuwait to UAE or Saudi, very different kind of set of realities. But there was a kind of idea that the Gulf states could act in a very particular way to bring people together. So you had this kind of ground up movement and this kind of, establishment of gathering spaces that brought together people from across the Arab world with other people from the wider Middle East and from South Asia, and then their kind of international counterparts. The Gulf states could act in this very particular way to really create very meaningful gathering places that were much more difficult elsewhere for various different geopolitical reasons, basically. And then, they could create these kind of gathering points, and then they could also become places of knowledge production that, and I think that was the hardest nut to crack, because internationally people understood, you can go to places like Dubai or Abu Dhabi and nowadays to Riyadh and to Jeddah, and you can meet a really interesting cross-section of people that you never meet anywhere else. But what they didn't quite understand, and really is only really coming to fruition today, really, is this idea that you can develop and grow particular systems of knowledge and of, kind of original ideas when it comes to culture that really don't exist anywhere else. So that was a later kind of development. But what happened in the mid 2000s was then, exactly as you said, the governments of the Gulf, particularly the UAE, and then later with Qatar and now with Saudi, began to recognize that within culture, you can have a very particular conversation that's really tricky to have elsewhere. You can open up doors for really kind of meaningful exchange. And basically, governments started to use this word soft power. How can the arts be kind of a new way of projecting who we are? And we know, just to be, we can be really honest on this podcast, that it wasn't an easy ride at that time, post 9/11 through the 2000s, the Arab world from the outside was viewed in a very particular way, quite often a very limited way. And people were very used to seeing on their TV screens images of war and, kind of crisis, but they weren't used to seeing projected from to the outside these ideas of incredibly deep and meaningful cultural history and contemporary practitioners who are doing extraordinary things. So it was a real switch in the conversation. Suddenly we were talking about painters, dancers, filmmakers, and people being incredibly creative, often against all the odds. And that was a complete change in the conversation. It took a lot of banging on doors to get people to take notice and to want to have a kind of positive, story coming out of the Middle East. But I think I'm obviously incredibly biased, but I think art and culture really brought a whole new conversation out into the world and enabled people to see people from the Middle East in an entirely new light.
Well, there's so many themes in what that was wonderful. Thank you. The convening power, when you make a place welcome and open, the convening power, the sense of building a new identity, the awareness of soft power. And we sort of see history repeating itself in certain ways. This is vocabulary that you can apply in significant ways to Saudi Arabia today. But let's bring you back. Let's follow you until you come back to Jeddah, in essence. So one of the significant elements of soft power was that Dubai Film Festival, which you were a part of. I mean, and I say that because this is the sort of thing, because we're all sort of media, we're besieged with media and celebrity and this and that sort of thing. But that's the sort of thing that would seep into a normal person's conscious outside of the Emirates. There were celebrities, there were known people going to be part of this big thing, and you were part of this big thing.
Yeah, no, it was an absolute blast, I have to say. I mean, when we started in 2003, it seemed like an impossible task to have the first sort of outside of Cairo, to have a first international film festival in the Arab world, and one that really not only attracted celebrities from Hollywood and Bollywood, but also projected a new kind of geography of the world, not new geography, but a geography that was newly understood for the first time. So, films from across Africa, from the Middle East, from Iran, from South Asia. So really very quickly, Dubai Film Festival became the place to come and discover films from the global South, basically, and all sorts of films, documentaries, shorts, features, and so you'd have this extraordinary kind of, we're going back to the same thing again, about this kind of extraordinary sense of exchange and a gathering point where you have, George Clooney on the red carpet, and then you have, a first-time filmmaker coming from Nigeria, and you have, Bollywood stars, and then you have documentaries on what was happening in Palestine, or, the Iraq war years. This was going all the way through that period too. So people kind of really telling it like it is, and showing films that were from that perspective, from the ground up again, but matched with these incredible nights of global premieres where you'd have the most glamorous crowd ever. So it was a really kind of real kind of juxtaposition of all these different types of positions that can happen in film. And I think one of the most exciting things that came out of that was not only the glamour and incredible kind of legacy of Dubai Film Festival, because alongside it, I mean, you had things like the world premiere of Wajda, the Haifa Mansour film out of Saudi, that then went on to be a massive global success. It won its first award at Dubai Film Festival. So you had all this kind of investment in production and investment in homegrown talent. But then on the every Dubai Film Festival was every December, but every kind of spring, we started this Gulf Film Festival. So this was saying, okay, we have this massive international platform, which brings all these kind of stars to the city and really reinvents the kind of identity of what Dubai was, and the kind of people that can hang out there right on the global stage. But then we also set up this Gulf Film Festival, which had a completely different vibe. Arabic was definitely the first language. We invited filmmakers from all the different Gulf states, and everybody met up there. Most of the films were short films, but over the years, features started to come through. And this was a real, homegrown kind of atmosphere where most of the filmmakers were young. They were all in their kind of 20s and 30s. Quite often there were very few people that didn't speak Arabic. It was a real kind of very much a homegrown crowd. Everyone would stay up all night, drinking tea and smoking endless packets of cigarettes and sort of, dissecting their films and getting together with each other. So it had this tremendously sort of old school yet incredibly productive atmosphere. And out of that came amazing scripts. There's still filmmakers now that I see making features in Saudi who are part of that original movement. And at that time, if we're just, touching on Saudi, there wasn't the infrastructure in Saudi at that time. There were, obviously, this was pre the rebirth of cinemas, way pre. So people were doing things DIY themselves with their friends, getting together, making short films, uploading them to YouTube, bringing their films with them to the Gulf Film Festival to discuss with their friends from across the Gulf. And, it was an incredibly vibrant atmosphere. And I remember that time there was a kind of, perception from expats living in the UAE or across the Gulf that we were somehow living in a non-critical society. And I used to say to them, just come and see a bunch of short filmmakers, at the Gulf Film Festival, and you'll have to eat your words and your hats as well, because, you had the most kind of vibrantly critical atmosphere there. People would show their films. The Q&A session would go on for hours. Everyone would dissect them and then say, hey, I'll help you. I think your music in your film is terrible. I know a friend who's a composer. Let me help you rework your film. So it was this very kind of vibrant, productive atmosphere that really, a lot of people coming to it would say, I feel like I've been to film school for a week. But the most intense kind of film education you can ever receive in my own language, with my own kind of comrades who share this kind of passion for film and culture from the Gulf, that speaks to the Gulf, that has Gulf characters, actors, everybody. So for me, it was one of the most kind of a real game changer of a kind of event of any kind, because it also kind of signaled, we can do this ourselves. We don't have to import from outside. We have talent. We have stories, from the Gulf. Let's, give them to our audiences and then export them to the world.
And I would, as an observer, you created this platform, this opportunity, this showcase that released, energized all this existing talent. Correct? I mean, it was there. And so that's that's on one side of it, but also it seems like when you got to the other side, there's an audience for this significant, so as this nexus, that you created here, not only to give these artists an opportunity, but they created their work, and there were people who really were very interested in seeing the work.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I have to say, it's not me alone. I was just part of a team,
right.
But it was a big group of people. And actually, quite a few of the key players from Dubai Film Festival are now running the Red Sea Film Festival in Jeddah, which is
we will get there. We will get there.
Okay, we're on our way to that
again, because it's really fascinating to do this. So all right, so sorry to interrupt there, because I definitely want to get there. So,
Not at all. I mean, I think I'm a passionate believer in people being able to see themselves on the screen and what that means. So if you're someone like me, or I assume you too, you've grown up in a world where you go and see films where people are speaking your language, and that you see yourself reflected on the screen, and you almost begin to take that for granted because of the ubiquity of that kind of media, right? But I mean, if you can sort of think of, I mean, one example we had a Kenyan film at Dubai Film Festival one year, and it was the first year we were showing a lot of films from Africa, and we were struggling a bit with the audience. So then us kind of programming team said to the box office, give us all 10 tickets, free tickets, and we'll get people into the cinema that really need to see these films. So we each took a bunch of tickets for very first-time filmmakers from across Africa that were showing their films in Dubai for the first time. And all the Arab films were always completely full, and all the English language and films from India were really full. But these ones were struggling a bit. So we took these tickets and we just went around in the hotels and places where we were frequenting, spotting people and just saying, hey, do you want to come see a film? And I gave a bunch of tickets to the security guards and valet people at the hotel next to the cinema, and said to them, hey, if you want to come and see this film, just if you clock off, come along, it's free. And they were like, really? And had to really sort of persuade them. They said, yeah, okay. And I remember seeing this guy the next day that was parking valet cars, and he just said, that he said, I've never seen anything like it. I saw myself in the cinema for the first time ever. The person on the screen spoke my language, my own language from Kenya, and he was me, you know, because it was a film about a guy that leaves his village, that goes to the big city, that tries to make it big, and you know, this kind of thing. And he was in tears, and he said, I've never had an experience like this ever in my life. And he said that the film director was there, and I talked to him, and you know, he had had this kind of epiphany, you know. And he said, I've seen films all my life from America and films from India, but I've never seen me. And
Yeah.
I always remember that because it was absolutely goosebumpy. And I kind of thought, right, everybody deserves the chance to see themselves on the screen. And we can never forget that kind of feeling of representation and the confidence that that gives you, and the way that culture can. At that time, I thought, this film has changed this guy's life, you know. And he said, can I go back tomorrow? And you know, I can see myself. I like film now. I get it, you know. And it was amazing. So I thought, that's a light bulb moment, you know. And we can replicate that across every art form.
Yeah,
It's all about representation.
it's a you know, as as a white American male, you know, perhaps you're the most privileged species to walk the earth. You know, that's something that someone like me, it doesn't immediately hit you. Certainly, because obviously there's so much, you know, expectation, privilege involved, things you're not even aware of, you're not thinking about. But I can, you know, I can see that and understand and recognize that how meaningful that would be when you stop and step back and look at how pervasive one perspective is. So Art Jameel. So you and thank you for that. That's just a wonderful drawing of the time and the place and the power and the energy involved and the really significant and dynamic role that played in not only just in, say, you know, just the sector, but the culture and self-perceptions and that sort of thing. So you became director of Art Jameel in Dubai.
Yeah. So yeah, I worked parallel to Dubai Film Festival, and then it became my full-time position at Art Dubai. So this was the art fair that started in 2006. Yeah, so then I was working in Dubai for Badoon magazine, all these various different, you know, hats with the film festivals and everything. And then I moved into being director of the art fair, and from 2010 to 2016. So that was a really interesting time when also, you know, in parallel to this, the story of Art Jameel was starting, because I mean, Art Jameel goes back 75 years. The Jameel family have been involved in philanthropy in Saudi and around the world. But Art Jameel as a sort of branded entity began in the early 2000s as well. So this was a kind of part of this parallel movement. You know, you could see the development of Art Jameel. That's when the Jameel gallery at the V&A started, which is the V&A Museum in London. It's their Islamic galleries, which are some of the most kind of prominent Islamic art galleries in the world. And alongside that, the Jameel Art Prize, which is a prize for artists from around the world that are inspired by Islamic design and Islamic art traditions. So this was kind of launched at the same time. And then you also had in parallel the Edge of Arabia movement. So that was something that Fadi Jameel, the founder of Art Jameel, was very heavily involved in, alongside Ahmed Martyr and Abdul Nasser Garem and Stephen Stapleton, so a British artist and two Saudi artists. This began at the same time as well. So the world was starting to kind of pick up a little bit about what was happening in Saudi through the prism slightly of international activities, and also through Art Dubai itself. So Art Dubai was where Atha Gallery, the leading gallery from Saudi Arabia that's based in Jeddah, where they had their international sort of debut. So Atha Gallery brought Saudi artists to the platform of Art Dubai, which was this, you know, international art fair that's attended by the international art world once a year every March. It's actually next week, so it's back again. So good timing. And so there were all these kinds of parallel things happening at the same time. And also this kind of the kind of backdrop even further was really an understanding on the part of the international art world that, you know, it wasn't all about London, Paris, New York, which tends to be the kind of assumption of the art world. There was a kind of realization that actually there were these other capitals around the world. Art Dubai was the first art fair in Asia to set up in 2006. And then after that, you had art fairs coming in Hong Kong, in Delhi. So there was this kind of proliferation across the rest of the world, and this sort of awakening from big museums and the art world and the art market across Europe and North America, that there was this other art world that had always been there. And actually artists from the global north had been sort of mining the global south for inspiration for a very long time. This exchange had been going on, but it meant that this kind of world was opening up at the same time. And then I knew obviously of Art Jameel's work, and I knew of the extraordinary philanthropy of the Jameel family for many years. I mean, they're absolutely renowned globally for their role in promoting art from the Middle East, and also with Community Jameel, which is Art Jameel's sister organization, with looking at social welfare and education, and nowadays also looking at the climate crisis and what we can do about that. So this extraordinary family of philanthropists, 3 generations of philanthropists, and I just happened to sit next to Ferdi Jameel at a dinner at some point in 2016, and we got chatting about education and the arts and what the arts can do for learning. And this is a big sort of passion of mine, and I didn't know at that time that Ferdi Jameel was even more kind of, you know, dedicated and knowledgeable about that kind of field. So we just sort of struck up a conversation, and by the end of the dinner, you know, we were cooking up all sorts of plans for Art Jameel. So then when he said, do you want to come and be director, and we're just embarking on a whole new, you know, phase for Art Jameel. I mean, absolutely. I mean, I loved my job at Art Dubai, but this was absolutely irresistible opportunity and a total honor, really.
What a fortuitous evening. That's
I know.
for all of us. So that is an extraordinary family. I don't know the family. I've known of Jameel, and you know, actually, to be honest, for a long time, I sort of paid attention to the Babris Jameel, you know, because sort of entrepreneurial things they were doing. Again, this is well before Vision 2030 and the focus on, you know, entrepreneurial and training and that sort of thing. They were doing this private initiative because they thought it was important, and of course, the art outreach.
Certainly.
So he sold you, and it didn't sound like a hard sell. To come get what's the relationship between the Dubai Art Jameel and the Jeddah Art Jameel? I mean, under the same umbrella, I guess. But I mean, can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess there's a kind of common thread that runs through all the Jameel philanthropy endeavors. You mentioned Babris, which is super important. You know, Community Jameel has a base in Saudi and also a base internationally, and then there's Art Jameel as well. So, and many other initiatives with scholarships and all kinds of programs. But I guess the common thread, which our board always emphasizes, is kind of how can you create impact on society? How can you make a difference? And how can you shift communities and societies into new ways of interacting and of living together? So there's a kind of common thread that runs through everything, even if it's from a scholarship for somebody to go to university, or something like the incredible labs that exist at MIT, the Jameel Poverty Action Lab, for example. So there are kind of, you know, very different ways of applying this, but even through the arts, it's the same common thread of real impact and community-oriented impact. So this runs through everything. My role is director of Art Jameel. So you can imagine Art Jameel as a kind of umbrella foundation that contains the team. We're almost 60 people now. When I joined in 2016, we were 3. So we've had this extraordinary growth. And so the incredible talent that works for Art Jameel, the ethos of what we do, and our kind of global presence through online activities, as well as things like our collections and our libraries. So there's a kind of mother foundation. And then under that sits two sites or venues, if you like, the Jameel Arts Centre in Dubai, and now, as of a year ago, Art Jameel in Jeddah. So these two institutions, and I think what's interesting and what I, one of the things I love about Art Jameel is that from the very beginning, and for the past 20 more years, Art Jameel didn't have a base. It was always working in collaboration with other people, and so it goes back to a similar model to Innova that I mentioned at the beginning, the London organization that I worked in the late 90s, of how can you kind of work with other people and go in here and go in there and really get across your ethos and bring up other kinds of entities with you as you grow. So that kind of sense of collaboration and exchange is absolutely in our DNA for Art Jameel, even though we now have these two incredible buildings and sites and museums to kind of take care of and to grow. So I was very lucky at joining Art Jameel just in 2016, when the foundations for each of the two sites were already there, actual physical foundations, and we were working with the architects on imagining these two buildings and what they can deliver to each of their cities. So it was a really incredibly, kind of time to really think utopian, which we've tried to hang on to as a team and kind of think, how do you really make a difference? How can we make sure that whatever we do is pioneering, that's kind of really delivering something new to our cities and our communities, doesn't replicate what's there already, and is fleet-footed and responsive and listens and tries to provide. So that's our kind of working model. And and I'm hugely lucky. I work with a whole bunch of incredible people. I've never actually listed the nationalities of the team, but we're around 60 people, I imagine, from at least 20, 30 different places. So a lot have grown up in the UAE and in Saudi, and bring all that kind of knowledge with them, but also bring such a diversity of experience. So it's an incredibly exciting and thought-provoking kind of environment to work in.
I think it's important to hear conversations like this. There are Jameel families out there. Obviously, this is an extraordinary example of a family with a purpose and a vision, and sort of an ego-less approach. Where we really want to get something, achieve something, and make a contribution. We're not particularly care who gets the credit, and you can accomplish so much when that happens. But there are other families like that, and I don't think that's something that people outside of Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, or elsewhere are fully aware of. But let's take you. Mm-hmm. You've referenced the Art Jameel, which opened last year.
Yeah, that's right.
What is Art Jameel?
Yeah, well, I just wanted to pick up on something that you said, because I think it's so important. This kind of egoless philanthropy, and that I think that's such a good way of summing up the Jameels. I mean, I often try to sort of, when I meet people from in the art world and in the world of philanthropy and NGOs, they're a household name, but from the outside, people don't always quite clock on to their kind of significance. So, I tried to, we had a whole big group come from some of the museums in New York recently and in LA, and I kind of tried to say, well, if you think of the nature of, the Rockefellers or the Fords or these kinds of families, this is what the Jameels are in Saudi. So there's a kind of absolute kind of recognition of the name. And obviously Abdul Latif Jameel, the business, is incredibly well known and part of the fabric of every city in Saudi. So we planned these two institutions. Actually, the Art Jameel in Jeddah was planned long before the center in Dubai, but Dubai kind of, took off, and typical kind of, Dubai construction story went very, very quickly. And our center in Jeddah went slightly more slowly. But actually, then, the timing with Jeddah turned out to be incredibly serendipitous, because it's, hit this wave of development in Saudi of cultural opening up, which was incredibly lucky for us to hit that kind of moment. So in the end, it was as it was meant to be. So we looked at each city and thought, what does each city need? Dubai has the market, it has galleries, It has these sort of government models of a biennial in Sharjah, museums in Abu Dhabi, but the UAE doesn't have a kind of flexible contemporary museum that can showcase the kind of breadth of young artists. So we thought in Dubai, what we really need to do is a contemporary art museum. And then we also figured out that there's no kind of visual arts library, a free library where anyone can go, the curious can do their research anywhere in the Gulf. So we thought the Jameel Library should sit in Dubai, an open access library for everybody that focuses on Gulf studies, cultural books, telling the exhibition histories and the cultural histories of the Gulf. And that sits in Dubai. But in Jeddah, you know, an incredibly vibrant city, a city that's, you know, really a kind of a place of that for centuries has been, you know, a place that kind of processes and introduces pilgrims from around the world to Saudi. So incredibly kind of cosmopolitan city as well. And a young people, you know, Saudi in generally has a young population. That's very much the case in Jeddah as well, and a very creative space. So we knew there were artists, fashion designers, you know, filmmakers, theatre enthusiasts. Everybody was there in Jeddah doing their thing and had been for some time before the reopening up and this new kind of renaissance of today. But people were kind of hidden in their own spot. So what we thought Jeddah really needed was a creative hub, a place that brings all those different art forms together, that's a kind of informal, dynamic, entrepreneurial, you know, kind of very vibrant kind of meeting point, basically a gathering space. So Art Jameel is quite a large scale building. It's around 17,000 square meters. Obviously, for people that speak Arabic, Hai or Hey is a kind of reference to neighborhood. So it's really about a kind of community neighborhood that brings together all the different creative disciplines in one spot. So and the design is by this fantastic architectural firm called YY, who are kind of part Japanese, part Lebanese, based in Dubai. They just won the Golden Lion at the Venice Biennale last year, so they're on the up. They're award-winning, incredible thinkers. And they said, let's create a building that is entirely open on the inside. All the kind of buildings, you know, congregate around a central courtyard. So it almost feels like a kind of typical Jeddah house, but on a much bigger scale. We won't put windows on the outside. We'll respect that this is a residential neighborhood. And also once you're into the sort of central part of Hai, you know, you're part of a community. It's almost like a kind of big group hug, you know, for the creative industries, bringing everyone together in one spot.
Now that's good architecture, if you can get a group hug effect.
Exactly. And it's entirely open. It's free. Anybody can walk in off the street. But once you're in it, it has slightly kind of, you know, you feel protected in it, which is great for the arts. It kind of a great sort of nurturing kind of quality. And then obviously Art Jameel runs the whole space, but we run it all, but we only operate our own not-for-profit initiatives in around sort of half the building, 2/3 maybe. And that includes High Cinema, which we can come on to because it's kind of comes full circle from what we were talking about earlier. High Arts, which is our exhibition block, studios for artists, an incredible multi-purpose space that anybody from the community can rent, and that's been home to farmers markets and high-end exhibitions, to conferences, to meetings, to everything. And then we have a specialist children's zone, High Explorers, which is a kind of young persons and children's kind of arts specialist center. And then the rest is all given over to incredible Jeddawi creative entrepreneurs. So everything from Aish Academy, which is a baking school. So the smell of croissants kind of, you know, comes over the courtyard.
Boy, this is a group hug.
It is a group hug, exactly. Completely. What else do we have? The incredible comedy club, which has been running for many years in Jeddah, but now they finally have a home of their own. And Fennec, they do classes in everything from you know, confidence building for teenagers to public speaking for business people. So they're all about how does comedy and performance open up a space for everybody. It's the one rule that if you're a high resident, as we call the kind of tenants, you have to do something for the public. You can't just squirrel away yourself and work every day. It's all about delivering something back to the community.
Mm.
So Muhtaraf, the publishing house, for example, they publish books and they do all their editing and designing in their space, but they also run workshops for other people. Atha Gallery is there with an incredible immersive art kind of center. Oh, who else have I forgotten? Such an incredible range of different kind of enterprises. We have 10 different tenants now that are part of that space. So the dream is, you can show up to Art Jameel, you have the best coffee, the best croissants, fantastic F&B, you can see a film, you can see an exhibition, you can do a class, you can hang out in the courtyard with your friends, attending a music concert. It's just a kind of whole encompassing world. And we're so lucky. Jeddah has taken us to their hearts and has been incredibly supportive, and it's a blast.
Somebody that I will be in Jeddah March 12, 13.
Amazing.
Would love to come see it. Absolutely would love to come see it. It sounds like a destination, a showplace, an incubator, everything. A hug.
Exactly. Yeah, a hug. Definitely. Hugs on tap. We'd love to invite you. And if you're there, I don't know whether it sounds like your trip is a set date, but as an example of the kind of festivals we do from March the 1st to the 4th, we have Hai Matsuri. Matsuri means festival in Japanese, and it's a Japanese themed festival. So there's a market with incredible food. There's all these Japanese products. There's drumming displays, music. There's a film festival. So it's, again, this kind of idea of how do you really open up to the community and do something for everyone.
Well, let me ask a big question, and you're extraordinarily well equipped to address this, but I don't want to ask too much. The Jeddah art scene. What is the Jeddah art scene today? How is it evolving? Can you put it in context between now and 5 years ago? However, how is it progressing?
Yeah, well, I'm sure your listeners are well aware of this kind of absolute, I used the word renaissance before, but a kind of revolution in terms of how culture is perceived within Saudi and how it's projecting itself to the outside world. So the scene that we have now is wholly different from 2 years ago, let alone 5 years ago, let alone 10 years ago. I mean, we have to be really careful not to sort of overstate the newness. Cinemas are returning, not being invented for the first time. Obviously, there have been people working, particularly in Jeddah, which was always known as the kind of cultural hub of Saudi for many, many years. So a whole body of local families used to run the Saudi Art Council, doing this exhibition 2139 every year for the last 10 years. The first time I went to Saudi was for the 2139 10, 12 years ago, something like that. And so there's been people that have been working on the ground, let alone all the creatives that we just mentioned before. They've been getting on with their thing, through for decades. So it's not that it's new. It's just there's a particular sort of real switch in the way that the government is supporting the arts, and that this kind of coming out into the public of the arts and the international attention is pretty much unprecedented. So across Saudi, there's, the Ministry of Culture has set up in the last couple of years, incredible body of people that are really pushing forward across everything. And they include the culinary, just to pick up on our croissants again, they include everything from the culinary and within culture through to visual arts, architecture and design, film, performance, everything. So every single sector of the arts is being looked at. There's a body of people there in the government who are pushing forward on that. ISRA, I'm sure you've talked, I think Todd is involved in ISRA, and other people that you probably had them on the program, working in the Eastern Province, obviously for many years as well, doing incredible things there. So, and then in Riyadh, you have the Misk Art Foundation, as well as all the government-led activities as well. So there's this kind of Eastern Province, Riyadh in the center, Jeddah on the west, that are these kind of three centers. And then obviously Abha and everything happening in the south is also kind of gaining recognition. And there's a new kind of, amongst all the different institutions and players talking to each other, a new kind of push to make sure that we're also doing things across Saudi. And of course, we should mention Al-Ula, which is, I don't know whether you've had anybody on the program yet from Al-Ula, but the that is really being designated as the kind of art hub, and incredible things are happening there. So looking at the kind of history of archaeology, as well as going forward, what's going to, involving contemporary artists in reimagining that incredible site. So
yes.
It's an incredibly vibrant time in Saudi. It's unbelievable. And then, I think sitting in Jeddah, there used to be a little bit of a conception of, okay, the sort of art focus has shifted slightly towards Riyadh. You have an incredible biennale in Riyadh, the Diriyah Biennial. There's a lot of kind of talent gravitating towards the capital. But Jeddah, didn't take this lying down, and has kind of, kind of kicking back, saying, let's also celebrate this kind of cultural history of Jeddah. Obviously, Jeddah famously has more sculpture across its city than any other city in the world, most of which was commissioned in the 60s by the mayor of Jeddah at that time, Mohammed Farsi. So there's a long history there of really thinking about culture in Jeddah and celebrating this kind of history of pilgrimage and position as a port city looking out to the world, being very open. So there's a lot of kind of history there to play on. And Art Jameel is the first kind of non-governmental initiative in Saudi of its kind. And we're hoping that other private families and initiatives come along and sort of support as well. But then we also sit alongside these amazing government initiatives. And at the moment, we have the Islamic Arts Biennial, which is the kind of counterpart to the Contemporary Art Biennial in Riyadh. And for listeners that think, what is a biennial? It's a very sort of art term, but it's basically a big exhibition that happens every 2 years. And you see in the Islamic Arts Biennial, again, the first of its kind in the world. But I mean, of course, this is going to happen in Saudi, and Saudi is the natural home for an exhibition like this. It pairs incredible treasures from Islamic art and design treasures. So what was my favorite object? Oh, this incredible Hajj passport from 1190 in the Gregorian calendar. So you can imagine these are absolute treasures that they've sourced from all over the world, including incredible museums in Greece and other places, as well as things that have come from across Saudi. And they paired that with contemporary art and architecture commissions. So inviting today's leading artists and architects to come up with new works that kind of are in conversation with these other works. So if anybody's in Jeddah, I really highly recommend to go to this, because even if you're not an art fan, you don't have to know anything about art and architecture or Islamic traditions to find this absolutely mind-blowing. And the location, it's in the Hajj terminal. So it's the site is this incredible design by SOM, who are amazing American architects, working with a Bangladeshi architect and others that, they built this in the early 80s. It's an incredible site, and it's now used for this kind of art show, as well as still being a working Hajj terminal. So that gives a little bit of an idea of kind of what's going on. And then Hai is there as a permanent fixture in the city. There are many other things popping up. So, and of course, listeners will know that, Saudi is an incredibly hospitable place. Anybody that shows an interest in the arts and culture scene there is so well looked after. There are so many people that are willing to take you on tours, give you advice. It's an incredibly welcoming and open place, and people are just there. The artists there are just incredibly excited to be connected now with the world and able to sort of exchange in this way that they never have done before.
Just amazing. Just so you know, on the 966, we celebrate small achievements. Early on, the ability to pronounce Biennale was a big achievement for us.
Yeah, I know. It's one of those things that you don't think about, and then you realize, okay, we stole this from the Italians for no particular reason, and just put it into our vocabulary.
But since we cover Saudi so closely, all of a sudden it was exploding. There were biennales everywhere. But it is interesting, and you make an interesting point. And I don't want to keep it too long. But you referenced the art scene in Jeddah. It's not being new, because exactly what you say. It's been there. There's a authentic and organic long-term history of it. It is a bit new in Riyadh.
Yeah,
more so. And but I
yeah.
think it's really fascinating that when you point out these different centers, and you also mention the Southwest and Upha, because we had Sean Foley on the show, and he talked about how significant cultural incubating occurred down there. That
Completely.
and so it played a big role too. So it is interesting how you see the dynamic, the regional dynamics, because that just is going to energize it more and more, and you're just going to be more creativity coming out of all of it.
Yeah, 100%. And I think, and Sean's actually he did a music event with us at Art Jameel, so
Yeah.
we have a connection with him. And yeah, no, absolutely. And I think what you can see now, which is again a kind of very much a new movement, but comes from this history, is that government is incredibly committed. I mean, if we think of globally, what is the significance of this? Where are people building museums for the first, in this kind of way? Where are people establishing cinemas and a film industry? There's at the moment globally, I don't think there's anywhere like Saudi. I mean, obviously, you have a huge private museum building program in China, but that's been going on for quite a number of years. But the way that Saudi has really kind of exploded in terms of activity in the arts is, I think it's pretty much unique in the world. So there's a lot of international interest, and I think it's there are things that we have to sort of think about and contend with. Everything is moving at an incredibly fast pace. A lot of the bigger known artists who are able to produce big works on scale, for everything from Desert X in Alula to the big biennales that are coming, they're finding themselves very stretched. So there's a kind of there's a sort of awareness that this speed cannot maybe be sustained forever, but everybody wants to sort of jump on the train and not miss it and be part of it. But I think in places like Art Jameel, we're kind of seeing like what can we bring to the scene that's different? How can we kind of contribute? And one way we're trying to do that is all by providing us something of a sort of counterweight, saying also, let's take advantage of this incredibly exciting moment, but let's also slow down. Let's think, how do we put these kind of foundations for the long term? So we just, for example, launched a research program where every year we're awarding a scholar with a grant to develop a kind of and write about and study histories of Saudi, so exhibition histories of Saudi, because you speak to contemporary artists and they say, well, I'm moving so fast, I don't have time to look at what happened in the 80s, let alone the 70s or 60s or 50s in Saudi. So this history could very quickly kind of slip through our fingers and get lost. So we're commissioning scholars and writers to look at the history, to write about it, to do that in Arabic, to make that open source kind of research. So we put that all on our website. People can come and sort of read about the history and tap into it. So also kind of thinking about how you put down foundations for the long term and provide artists of all kinds a place to sort of hang out and develop their work in a really kind of considered way. So, you've got to be on the train, but you also need to sort of make sure that there are long-term endeavors there. And again, we're just kind of thinking, how do we plug the gaps? That's our role. Create impact, be pioneering, kind of move into different spaces, listen to the community, respond, and make sure that whatever we're doing is complementing all the other initiatives going on. But it's an amazingly collegiate atmosphere. I mean, if we just take High Cinema, for example, we launched High Cinema in December, so it's a very new part of High, and it's Saudi's first bespoke independent cinema. So ITHRA has been doing amazing things showing independent film for some time, but this is a kind of slightly different take. It's a 2-screen cinema complex with a research space, archive space, and educational spaces as well. And we're showing, the idea is to show films from all over the world that are kind of independent art house films, documentaries, things in different languages, and also to show Saudi film and encourage Saudi filmmakers to come and show their works here. So it's been an incredibly exciting endeavor. But of course, being the first something is not always easy. And at the moment, Saudi is, funnily enough, set up for multiplexes. If you employ 2,000 people and have 12 screens showing, the big blockbusters, you can get a license, no problem. If you're kind of trying to do something quite different, this is a kind of emergent idea and art form. So we've had the most fantastic relationship with the government on this, where they've said, okay, this is an interesting concept. We actually want to see art house cinemas across the country. Let's work together to figure out, we'll use High Cinema as a kind of pilot project. We'll learn, let's work on it together and figure out what does a cinema like this need. So it's really interesting to be in this role where, as an independent organization, we have this kind of relationship with government where we're figuring things out together. So that kind of very collegiate atmosphere of what does the country need? How can we all work together to provide it? Let's have an open forum. What are you doing? I can do this to complement what you're doing. I mean, that again, I think that's very unusual. If I speak to colleagues in New York or London or Paris, they don't have that kind of relationship with government and with colleagues anymore. So I guess we're putting down the building blocks together, and that's a really exciting kind of endeavor, and one that's very open with conversations. So yeah, tremendously exciting. At the moment at High Cinema, we have a whole season that's dedicated to children's films. So we're doing, it's super exciting. So we're saying to all the families and kids, we're doing some free screenings to get everybody really excited about cinema and independent filmmaking and real cinema. And then we're also doing programs with schools. So schools bring their classes, they see a range of different animations and animated films in different languages from across the world. They do a behind the scenes at the cinema kind of tour. So they kind of see, what is a projection booth? What is a 35mm film? How does a cinema kind of work? And then they do an art class after it in which they create characters that they saw in the films. So it's a kind of 360 experience for kids. And it's so funny. All the teachers, all the team at Art Jameel just keep saying, I wish I'd had this when I was a kid.
It's brilliant. It's brilliant. It's brilliant marketing.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's also in many of these kind of things that are new and pioneering in different countries around the world. If you get to the kids and get the kids enthusiastic, they bring the parents who might be harder to persuade sometimes, and then you can kind of really create change, which is really exciting.
Antonia Carver, Director, Art Jameel. On behalf of our listeners and our viewers, I just want to say this was such a treat and such a privilege. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for sitting down with us at the 966. This was just really, really priceless. Terrific.
Thank you so much I really appreciate it a lot. We're all about, trying to get the message across about how art and culture can transform society and, really bring people together and enable exchange in an entirely different way to any other field. So it's all about communication. So I really appreciate the chance to come and chat to you. And any listeners, if they want to check us out, our website is artjameel.org. We're on Instagram with Hi Jameel, Jameel Art Centre and Art Jameel. And we absolutely welcome all visitors to our centres, and there are many other ways to interact and get in touch wherever you are in the world.
Richard, that was your and therefore our conversation with Antonia Carver. And a reminder, you can listen to just conversations or just segments if you go to our YouTube page, and we have all of our previous conversations with previous guests there. But Richard, that was awesome. Great, again, to listen to that as an end user for me, and just was a really great conversation.
We on the Soustag Review and the 966, there are occasions where you carry the Soustag Review, occasions where I carry it. We're on the travel, we're doing something, we're sick, whatever. Same thing with 966. That's one of the beautiful things about being part of a team. And you and I both sort of remark, if we haven't had anything to do with the creation of the product, when we get to the product, so you do a Soustag Review and I look at it and I go, holy crap, this is really good. It's a lot of fun to see what a valuable thing it is.
I'm surprised you said that, because I could not agree more. Like yesterday, the day before, when I was completely knocked over and I got to read the review as the end user, was so informative, because I wanted, we want to stay up to date all the time, 365 days a year. And I sort of thought, okay, like what would I open up to try to discover this? And it just opened up my email, boom, everything's there. It's the most digestible piece of, anyway, we're tooting our own horn, but thank you for saying that, because I completely agree. And that was cool to use, to listen to as an end user. It's just fascinating stuff.
Yeah.
So thank you for carrying the torch.
Well, then, it was my turn. You've carried the torch many a time.
Unfortunately, though, if we're doing turns, I hate what awaits for you if it's any sickness at all, because couldn't wish that upon anyone. So anyway,
well, let's hope my turn away is not necessarily because I'm on my deathbed with
well said. Well said.
Something else.
Richard, let's get to Yalla.
Yalla, Saudi in a minute.
Yalla. Well, my voice isn't even there. I just whispered
I like
it.
the
That
whisper.
was really weird.
The whisper effect was quite good. It was new material.
I apologize for creeping everybody out with that. It meant to be the traditional Yalla. I just don't have it.
It was a nice little twist on things. All right. Yalla number one. CNN Travel features Diriyah, latest giga project aiming to transform Saudi Arabia on the edge of the Saudi capital, Riyadh. And you know this place well, Lucian. You and I have been there, but you've been there a number of times this year already.
Mm-hmm.
On the edge of the Saudi capital, Riyadh, is another giga project that aims to attract 27 million of those annual visitors to a 14 square kilometer site filled with historical and cultural attractions. Considered to be the birthplace of the nation, Diriyah is the ancestral seat of the Al Saud dynasty and home to the UNESCO World Heritage Site of Al Tarif, the site of the first Saudi state established in 1727. Diriyah has huge significance for modern Saudi Arabia, both historically and culturally, and as a key giga project in the kingdom's Vision 2030 plan.
Yeah, Richard, this is going to be a must visit when you visit Riyadh, and they've totally finished it. You and I visited there in 2016, I think was the last time that we were there. And they had already done a few of one or two of the puzzle pieces of a 100 puzzle piece development. It is so huge now. And I spent my last day in Riyadh there driving around it with a friend. And it's so big, you have to actually drive around it. I mean, there's so much going on and so much you can't see from the road, actually, because they're building massive buildings that have huge footprints and will go very deep underground as well. And what I think is really interesting about it is the architecture. I mean, you have developments in Saudi Arabia. Look at CAFT. CAFT could be in any major city in the world. It could be in Singapore. It could be in New York. I mean, you kind of don't know where you are when you're in CAFT. There's only some elements that hint to you that you're in Arabia, whereas Diriyah is just like... and you're going to see it in a few weeks. And it's really just a scale out version of what we saw back in 2015. It's unbelievable. And it's so cool because what they're doing looks modern, like a lot of glass, but then the traditional building shape and the building color and just is like cool. I mean, it's very original. That would not look in place in New York or in Singapore or anywhere else. It's uniquely Saudi in design, which is awesome. And Richard, Jerry Inzarello, CEO of this development, that is a huge sort of get for Saudi Arabia as they prioritize this giga project. He's all over the place in the media, and he's cordially invited to join us on the 966 as well. Oh, he's just a maverick, and what he's doing there is incredible. I mean, you have the development and you have the architecture that I just mentioned, but you also have amazing things like racing tracks and walkability. I mean, it's just, I don't know. It's just really cool. We're gonna have some footage that I got just from driving around there on the, for the YouTube videos. Yeah, I managed to not drop my camera too many times, which is something else. But then you'll have things like tennis tournaments there, and I mean, you can still see the original Wadi Hanifa that runs through it. It's not much of a wadi. It's not quite the size of the Potomac River, but it's cool. You're there and you feel like you're in history. So yeah, this is a good one here because this is just. I mean, this is going to be the place to visit. It's going to be like, oh, make sure you see Diriyah and this and this and this. It'll be the first thing you list when you are talking about visiting Riyadh. So, yeah, really awesome.
And I think you're right. You referred to the King Abdullah Financial District, but any other thing, there's an authenticity to this. Obviously, this is the capital seat of the first Saudi state. Interesting. We had, one of our one big things was Saudi Founding Day when we were there in 2016 or whatever together. The commonly accepted Saudi Founding Day was 1747 or something like that. That has now changed. And again, back to, creating and forming your own narrative, which is what the Saudis are doing. Jerry Inzarello, what a treat. Boy, wouldn't he be fantastic? I mean, this is a guy, former vice chairman of Forbes Travel, CEO of IMG just decades of experience in travel and hospitality. And apparently many, many years ago, he went to the UNESCO site of At-Tarif, which is what they call it's been a UNESCO heritage site for a long time. But he was excited about it, fascinated with it for many years, long before Vision 2030. And so for him to come in, and he does bring energy and enthusiasm, doesn't he?
He sure does.
Obviously, tremendous amounts of experience, but
Yep.
your personal, recommendation and commentary I think is compelling, but it is really something that's worth seeing. And just the numbers, it's a $63 billion project. I mean, we have to remember it's going to be like 38 new hotels, 26 cultural attractions. It's eventually 100,000 people are going to, are expected to have, live there.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess there was I'm sorry, please.
No. So this is, when we talk about the giga projects, this is one of my favorites, because not only is it massive, creative, sort of jaw dropping, but it's also has organic ties.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Richard, when we were there in 2016, there was just a disconnect in my brain, because they were finishing out the museum as well. We got a exclusive tour of that. And then they had a sort of shopping area and a mall. And I sort of thought, oh yeah, like this thing is almost done, right? As of 2019 or whatever, 2020. And people looked at me, they were like, what are you talking about? Because I thought that was it. And then it turned out to be, 50 times that. But recently they've announced things like, international hotel brands coming in there. And so it was just really cool to get the sense of the scale here, because yeah, I mean, that is going to be, I mean, you're going to want to see that, like you would want to see the Eiffel Tower area in Paris and, Times Square in New York, because it's just so like authentically Saudi. And they're doing a good job with it. It's not gauche. So anyway, just, yeah, really cool. Send me selfies of you there, especially the big flag. And I posted this on my Instagram story, but the flag is so big, and I just sort of did it like a story or whatever, and like looked up at the flag. It's so big, it looked like CGI. I kind of couldn't unsee that. I was like, I saw that. It's unbelievable. So anyway, really cool. Richard, yellow number 2, Saudi Arabia's PIF invests $1.3 billion in construction companies. The PIF has invested $1.3 billion by way of subscribing to new shares as part of the capital increases in each of Nesma and Partners Contracting Company, El Safe Engineering Contracting Company, Al Bawani Holding Company, and Al Mabani General Contractors Company. The investment will allow the construction services sector in Saudi Arabia to scale up capacity, enhance capabilities, boost growth, drive advanced technology adoption, and improve local supply chains for current and future projects. The company's partnership with the PIF will help them expand their operations and businesses on a regional and international scale.
Just fascinating. And, it's just a little story, you'd think, but it wraps up so many things what the PIF is doing. In order to achieve everything that's going on, it takes enormous contracting capacity, and they want this obviously to be spearheaded or at the very least equal partnership with Saudi companies. And so these investments are just another boost to companies they think are professionally and well run, and can carry the mantle of essentially saying, look, in the contracting sector, we want you to carry the mantle of Vision 2030, which is a diversification, which is a growth and expansion and upping of best practices, upping of capacities, and these sorts of things. And also part of this, investment is to, look abroad for investment, that sort of thing. And I just want to say a couple of things about this. One, very cool if you're one of these 4. 2, one of my oldest friends and someone well in Saudi Arabia is Khalid Al Saif, is CEO of Al Saif Engineering. So Mabruk, congratulations, well earned. You run an amazing company and you've built it. I'm talking to Khalid now. You've built it. You've just been extraordinarily professional and capable in your stewardship of that company. And 3, I thought it was interesting because we had Jacob Mum on the show, and he's a managing director of Bechtel, and head really of the BACS consortium, the BACS consortium, and the member so the BACS consortium is Bechtel, Al Mabani, General, Consolidated, CCC Contractors, and Siemens. So Al Mabani, one of the members of that BACS consortium, is one of these four countries that, I mean, companies that, has been designated as, you're doing a great job. We want you to be even better at it. Here's some help.
Big year for Khalid Al Saif. His
it
daughter
is.
gets engaged to the Crown Prince of Jordan,
Yeah.
and then the PIF
That's
buys it. And it's good to be Khalid.
Khalid can't sit still. He's always busy doing impressive stuff. But
Yep.
yeah,
Yep. He ranks
you're
up there, Richard, in the hardest working guys in Saudi Arabia, and that top is pretty crowded and really hard to crack into the top three. So
I didn't get to ask him, but if your daughter marries the Crown Prince of Jordan, who pays for the wedding?
oh man, it's gonna be a really big bill, whatever it is.
I know, but yeah,
I think both can afford it. But maybe. Yeah, that's a good question. Typically, right, if it's an arranged marriage, right, isn't it the opposite?
It wasn't arranged. It wasn't arranged. They met in school.
Okay,
but yeah,
cool.
It was definitely not arranged. They met in school. And so, and anyway, we don't want to get too much into it, but this is a guy I hold in high regard.
Yes.
I just have tremendous admiration for all he's done and his energy and his intelligence. So anyway, this is very cool from the PIF point of view, and it's very cool from the diversification point of view, and it's very cool from the contracting sector in Saudi Arabia point of view.
Yeah, and it makes sense too, right? I mean, if you're the PIF, you're saying, look, we've got a lot of construction going on here in the next 2 decades. We're going to believe in these companies and their ability to deliver. We want to show them buy-in. So it's a good business move, and it's very interesting. You're right. This seems like it could be a small story, but in fact, it ties very many stories into one. So yeah, it's a good one.
Number 3, Saudi Arabia has been chosen to host the next edition of the FIFA Club World Cup, with the football tournament due to kick off in December. Boy, they don't wait on this. The intercontinental competition will be staged from December 12 to 22. Saudi Arabia will be only the 6th host of the competition since its inception in 2000. Football is a national sport of Saudi Arabia, rooted in communities in all corners of the country where 80% of the population play, attend, or follow the game. The awarding of the FIFA Club World Cup 2023 represents the latest chapter of Saudi football's development. The kingdom was also recently confirmed as host of the 2027 AFC Asian Cup and has an active bid in place to host the 2026 AFC Women's Asian Cup.
Boy, what a year for Saudi football. Saudi soccer is the official nomenclature on this podcast, but momentum truly. You got Ronaldo there now with Georgina, driving headlines on everywhere they go and everything they do. Al Hilal made it to this year's Club World Cup final, lost to Real Madrid. Actually, Richard, when I was landing in Saudi Arabia last week, I was getting to my hotel late. Everyone was sort of nervous and sad looking. There was a huge gathering outside my hotel, and I asked what was going on there, having not really slept much, and the receptionist was like, "Oh, there's the Club World Cup final, and Al Hilal is losing 5-3." And I was like, "Oh man, sorry. Can I still catch the end of the game?" But just exciting times there for Saudi football, and it's sort of unknown whether or not the Ronaldo investment will pay back. It seems to me like it will, just sort of intangible, unmeasurable things like growth and PR and branding and stuff. But this will be huge. It's a 10-day event. It's going to happen just before the Christmas holiday. Just really cool and very good for Saudi. So the home team gets an automatic bid, or the home country gets an automatic bid. So they'll definitely have a team in it, either Al Hilal or Al Nassr. Al Nassr, yes. So,
but it could be, we don't know. It could be some upstart. Could be Wrexham. Saudi Wrexham.
It could be, or a feisty little team out of Al Majma with a smaller stadium, but a very scrappy, they play as a team.
Al Fayez squad. You're right.
Al Fayez. You never know. So, boy, that would be a big stage for our boys, huh, Richard?
It really would. Boy, we'd be rocking those jerseys.
Oh, yeah. Yep, that's tattoo territory right there.
Let's not make
Let's not make any promises here.
Yeah. That would be, my oldest has a few tattoos, some of which he has to explain. That's, can you imagine me trying to explain an Al Fayed tattoo?
I didn't know that about your oldest. I plan to ask him, but
it was under the radar for a very long time because his mom his
Hmm.
mom actually cried the first time he told her he had a tattoo.
See, I'm uninked at this point. I'm sans ink, and at this point, to get ink would be like it'd have to be. I don't even know what would qualify, but the bar is now so high. Whereas if I'm much younger, like your son, yeah, there's not quite as high of a bar. And now it's like, are you going to do it now? You're old.
And he's a young officer in the army, and
Hmm.
so you need to that's just sort of part of the course, I
Par for the
think.
course. Yeah, just such a great young man, Richard. You've raised him so right. So, um,
Um, a
yes.
number number
Is it
three. Moving on
three?
to a really hard story.
No, no,
Turkey's
no. It's yellow. It's four, right?
Is it
This should
four?
be me. Boy, we're really
Oh yeah,
organized
go
right now.
ahead. All
Yeah,
right, sorry.
sorry.
I do good. This is a tough one.
Yes, this is tough. Getting serious. Thousands dead, millions displaced. The earthquake fallout in Turkey and Syria. Turkey's death toll has climbed above 44,000 people. The country's disaster authority has said this number is expected to rise further given that more than 345,000 apartments were destroyed and many people are still unaccounted for. In Syria, already devastated by years of war, authorities have said more than 5,800 people have died. Hans Kluge, the World Health Organization's Europe director, said relief workers were facing, quote, the worst natural disaster in the region for a century, adding that 26 million people need assistance across both countries. The WHO launched the largest rescue operation of its kind in the organization's 75-year history.
Yeah, I mean, we have this is obviously something that occurred in Turkey and Syria, but it's a region wide. It's a global thing, and you just in reading that little blurb, when you talk about worst, biggest operation, 75-year history, 26 million people. I mean, this was a 300 plus kilometer long event. The rift was 7 meters plus in some places in terms of displacement. I mean, a 7.7 magnitude 7.7 earthquake for 65 seconds, followed almost very closely by a second earthquake above 7 for 45 seconds. Apparently that first one had the energy equivalent to 500 atomic bombs. I mean, just catastrophic, and in very difficult areas, sort of along that. So I gather there's an Arabian shelf going north, and it's running into an Anatolian shelf that is squeezed between it and Europe, and it's a slide shelf, which is like the San Andreas Fault. So it doesn't crunch up; it slips, and builds up a lot of energy and slips, and so Turkey's been hit by a lot of the earthquakes. I think it's 21 earthquakes of magnitude 7 or higher since 1900. But just disastrous, and a very Syria's besieged anyway, and this in the Northwest Territory, which is disputed territory. A lot of the territory is sort of controlled by a group that's designated as a terrorist group by the West and the U.S. It's just catastrophic, and everyone's rallying to do what they can, but logistically, it's very hard to help. So it's going to be a huge rebuilding cost and process for Turkey, and it's just devastating for Syria, which is already in disarray. And you have sort of displaced people displaced again and displaced again and displaced again. It's just it's sad and catastrophic.
Sad and catastrophic. Takes the breath out of your lungs. Just seeing the footage and learning about some of the stories, it's just absolutely horrible. And yeah, I mean, there's nothing that anyone can say to undo the heartbreak and the damage. We know that Saudi Arabia and other nations are flying in to help, but no matter how much help is provided, there's only so much that can be done. Just horrible, just absolutely horrible.
I mean, the Gulf countries, close to 400 million or more in donations already. Saudi Arabia had a online charitable donation that drew over 1.5 million people and raised $100 million, almost overnight. But this is going to be a long, long rebuild, and it's going to be, it'll be fraught with politics, with people blaming other people and trying to get in and help aid. There's already some of the aid that's gone into Syria is being sold on the streets of Damascus because it's a fractured country and the access is spotty and regulated and difficult. It's as so often happens, folks who are down get kicked again and again.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what you saw with a lot of people, certainly in Syria and places in Turkey too.
Yeah, absolutely horrible.
5, my turn.
Mm-hmm.
Iraqi and Saudi officials signed a memorandum of understanding on 19 February to share sensitive intelligence and deepen security cooperation, marking the first time the two nations have signed a security pact since 1983. The MOU entails, quote, all forms of security cooperation, exchange of points of views, and undertaking joint security activities, unquote, Iraqi state media reported. Iraq and Saudi Arabia share an 800-kilometer border.
Mm-hmm.
The historic MOU comes at a time when Baghdad has started to normalize ties with the Gulf countries following decades of isolation due to the 1990 Iraqi invasion of Kuwait.
Easily one of the most idiotic and terrible miscalculations in recent American history, Richard, the war in Iraq. It will be decades until we are beyond that strategic blunder, just at the 30,000 foot level. Expensive blunder for the U.S., $1.9 to $2.1 trillion. That's $6,300 per taxpayer. That says nothing of the lives lost in the war, tragically, on both sides, the families and communities harmed on both sides. If you're a regional power like Saudi Arabia, you only have to deal with the cards as dealt to you. And no one is saying Saddam Hussein wasn't a dictator or horrible or a terrible person or did unspeakable things, but removing him under false pretenses and then destabilizing the region at an enormous cost to the U.S. taxpayer. And for what? We're still feeling that today. But Saudi Arabia has to deal with what it has in front of it. The majority of Iraq is Shia today. It has to use diplomacy and foreign policy and sort of a mixture of both foreign policy, diplomacy, and also hard power to sort of make sure that they're, is seeing its interest